Okay, Chris and Judy started their holiday in London. The hotel room was comfortable but compact, although it was in a fairly nice area of London. Breakfast was in the basement, fairly nice each day, but there were plenty of pubs nearby where you could get a traditional meal. Bangers and mash, or a huge-sized Sunday roast and a glass of cider.
Which one person managed to actually finish, would you believe?
There were still red telephone boxes around. And the guards still marched up and down at Buckingham Palace. Of course, one person wanted the whole thing abolished, but he was only one of several protesters who, like the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, camped outside Parliament. There were quiet spots in London, like St James Park.
Well done, Judy.
And there was a squirrel, which we thought the grandchildren would have been delighted in meeting. Chris and Judy found Trafalgar Square very early in the morning before all the tourists arrived to climb on the lions. But the countdown clock for the Olympics kept going anyway. And modern art in the form of a ship on a bottle stood nearby, but there was much more modern art at the Tate Modern Gallery.
I'm taking this very seriously, right?
In all their previous visits, Chris and Judy had never found time to visit St Paul's. Incredibly ornate inside. But they climbed that dome, 581 steps, and had a great view of London. They decided on a non-traditional thing, like a ride on the London Eye. 30 minutes. The top, go all the way and back to the bottom.
There were about 25 people inside of each of the cabins. Could walk around quite freely.
They visited the Camden markets, watched the canal barges go by, and then caught one themselves back towards the centre of London. It was interesting to watch London as it played on the bank. There were also Londoners actually living in barges moored along the bank. Okay, we also visited the Globe Theatre, which is a Shakespearean play. Chris and Judy were undercover, unlike some others. And there were several visits by train outside London through Victoria Station. Trains were fairly comfortable, clean and usually on time. And the first trip was to Henry VIII's old palace at Hampton Court. Of course, it had been rebuilt a little bit since the days of Henry VIII.
It's raining.
But the original Tudor buildings were out the back, complete with incredibly ornate chimneys. Judy met one of the guards, and of course, the ghost of King Henry was still talking about his 8 wives.
6 wives.
Oh well, 6 wives.
He may be younger than me by some 30 years, but is he not right and proper? You would know this well than any, for I'm very good Audley. Oh, is it not right and proper that an old...
The gardens were very, very peaceful and easy to rest in. Chris and Judy also managed a visit to the Kew Gardens. The Victorian glass houses are still working quite well. There's still a Victorian attempt at a Japanese garden. Windsor Castle was fun, but not many photos could be taken inside. However, Judy did give her new rain jacket a bit of an outing. It was a pleasant change not to have to wear a 15-year-old red one. Then there was the plane to Rome, and the trip to Italy started. The room was better than in London, a little larger, a little better put together, and breakfast was in a large buffet downstairs, a bit of a break from continual diet of bacon and eggs.
And lovely having a cappuccino to start the day.
Chris and Judy explored plenty of the back streets of Rome, checking out the food and markets, the traditional sites like the Colosseum and the Forum. And yes, the guard is still there at the Vatican. And with all these tourists, yeah, I guess he's needed.
Move forward, please. Go forward. Vatican Gardens. For the tourists inside, and virtually no noise from the city of Rome at all.
At night, the square in front of St. Peter's was one of the most peaceful and attractive places of the whole city. Much more peaceful than around the Trevi Fountain, which was fine to have a look at, provided you could get through the tourist crowd. At least at the Spanish Steps you could watch what was going on. There appeared to be a young man down there with a new way of trying to pick up foreign tourists. But he was only trying to sell them. Via Condetti, top luxury marketplace was nearby. Plenty of museums. And more statues and bits and pieces than you could ever want to look at. However, eventually it was time to head for the island of Sicily and the city of Palermo. Italian trains were usually on time and clean inside. This one they had to split into 2 halves and run it onto the ferry across to the island. When they finally found the hotel, it was on the 5th floor, reachable by a lift which was just big enough for 2 or 3 people. And a bit of a maze to actually find the room. Comfortable, tiny shower, a view over the city, and a small square where people used to celebrate with karaoke at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. However, the view from the terrace was absolutely fantastic, morning and night, over the whole city. Markets were absolutely fascinating, and some of the churches were more elaborate in their decoration than anything we saw in Rome. Of course, wandering around this city looking at churches, particularly on a Saturday, meant that you'd inevitably come across a wedding or two, and Chris and Judy did just that. The bride and groom are the last to leave the church on an Italian wedding, so they can get the attention of all the guests on the
The
steps.
blokes look a lot less practiced in their seats than the women in their gear.
The guy bobbing around in the front is about to hand the newly married couple
For the next 14 years.
doves so they can release them. The bride seemed more worried about the doves than anything else.
He's got a gun. See the guy to the left? It's some sort of a tube, and I bet it's loaded with.
Well, Chris and Judy didn't spend all their time in Palermo. They took several train trips into the country. You could even see some of the country through the dirty windows. Clean inside, but the outside, different matter. One city they visited seemed to be a pile of skyscrapers and not much else. But right next door, an area where there had been 10 Greek temples, one of them fully standing. Another church they visited was covered with mosaics. Every flat surface and quite a few of the curved ones was actually covered with stories in mosaic, small tiles. And we mean every surface. Inevitably, somebody decided to have a wedding. But why you'd hold a wedding in a church thronged with tourists puzzled Chris and Judy. They visited a couple of seaside areas. And then started to get ready to go to the next phase of their trip in Tuscany. Although when they saw the ship a few days before, they were still banging and hammering on one of the rear doors. When they reached their cabin, it was a little worn, a little weary, but larger than any of the hotel rooms they'd seen so far. They were able to watch Italians ready to drive their cars onto the ships for their annual holidays. Goodness knows what they left at home, because most of it seemed to be on the roof. They joined the queue of ships leaving Palermo harbour heading north. And Chris and Judy, after enduring the windy weather, picked up a car and drove to their farmhouse in Tuscany. However, that's a story for another day.